This video is all about how we navigate through the end of a friendship cycle and how it can happen, why it happens, how we can try and salvage a friendship, and what to do when a friendship just isn't salvageable anymore. Why do friendships end? So, in my opinion, friendships can be tricky at the best of times. And as we get older, as we move through different chapters in our life, so house moves, new jobs, jobs that aren't local, long-term relationships, marriage, babies, etc., that space that we once had to accommodate our friendships, it shrinks as other things start to move into that. And so as this space shrinks, we have less emotional capacity to deal with friendships that weren't as close as we perhaps gave them credit for. We end up with perhaps a very small circle of friends that accommodate the space that is left over. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is perhaps the friend that we're talking about, they haven't given our friendship the time and space to breathe as they've progressed on in their life. And actually that space that was left for us has now been filled up with something else. And I'm not saying that our friendship was fickle, your friendship was fickle, but sometimes friends, they kind of move on and they occupy that space that you once filled without rhyme or reason. And that's what makes the friendship breakup, particularly painful, when you're not given that reason. They just kind of up and go, no explanation. It's far easier, I think, when you make that decision to walk away from a friendship, because you have got that clarity. And I would hope that you would give the other person an explanation, unless it's like a mutually accepted thing where friendships die away organically. But I think in that situation it can be very, very hard to preempt whether your friend is, or your ex-friend is, actually thinking the same way. See what I mean? It can just be a real minefield. It can be really complicated. So in the past, before my motherhood chapter, I felt that I was drifting away from friends who I really cherished, and I sometimes felt insecure about a friendship ending before a friendship actually did or was ever going to. But what I would say when it comes to working on a friendship is put in the time and energy, put in the work for that friendship. Try and meet up regularly. That could look like twice a year for some friends, and twice a year will be more than enough, especially if you don't live very close together, or if it's someone who lives quite close to you, once a month. And if you can't meet up once a month, schedule a phone call in. Friendships do take work. Some friendships take more work than others for whatever reason. And I think it's important that you invest that time. Like growing a plant, you need to nourish it, you need to give it the space to breathe, but you also need to pay attention to it as well. It can be a lot harder if the friend that you're thinking about isn't giving you any movement. So they're not actually investing any time and space for your friendship to develop and evolve and grow. Then that's when other conversations perhaps need to be had. If I talk about my motherhood chapter, I would say that it was all very traumatic giving birth. I gave birth in lockdown. My birth partner wasn't able to be with me. It was during the pandemic, the early stages of the pandemic, when no one had a clue what was going on. It was just a crazy, busy, stressful time. And, I had some really good friends that stood on the sidelines and waited and gave me that space, but were there, and I didn't need them to text me constantly for them to tell me that they were there, but they were there. There were other friends that drifted, and there were one or two that just kind of went. And this is sort of after I ducked my head out to breathe. And when I say that, I'm not saying that I didn't contact them, because, oh yes, I did. But something had changed, the landscape had changed. And perhaps unbeknownst to me, my priorities had shifted way before I'd even consciously realised it. And the other person, the friend, may have taken the signals and kind of just gone with it, because they perhaps thought that, you know what, she doesn't have time for me anymore. This friendship is effectively dying, and they just up and left. And when you look at it like that, you can't really blame the other person for thinking that. That's how they see things from their angle. But what I've learned navigating through motherhood and balancing friendships and prioritising those that matter is that for the ones that don't matter so much, or the ones that need work, or the ones that you really don't want to lose, don't continue on this trajectory and let things fade out by themselves. Have those conversations, as intense and as difficult as they can be. But you don't even have to go full steam ahead and have really intense conversations. You can just send a voice note and say, you know what, it's been a while, let's reconnect, it's really important to me, and it would be lovely to see you again. Those words aren't instigating an argument, they're not instigating a confrontation. When you speak from your heart centre and you relay what you really feel, which is how important that person is to you, then they'll get the message. There doesn't have to be a bus stop. You know, you can just take off from where you wanted to take off from. What makes a breakup more painful? Okay, this is easy for me. For me, it is the lack of clarity, the explanation, the foresight, the insight, just not having a clue why they up and left. This can be further compounded by someone who then denies all knowledge of there even being a problem. I would call this a gaslighter, if I'm honest. And if they've just up and left, they've basically ghosted me. And I'm not using these terms flippantly, because trust me, I understand the emotional and psychological weight behind them. But that's what some people just do. They just ghost you and then pretend that it's your problem. And what I want to say about that is not okay. If someone has the capacity to treat you in that way, then you need to have conversations with yourself where you need to really think about whether you want that person in your life. For me, the answer would be a swift no. Sometimes you're not going to get that instant gratification when it comes to friendships ending. You might not get that closure in that way. You might not get someone that's going to sit in front of you and just lay their cards on the table. And while that doesn't feel okay, sometimes we just have to move on in whatever way we can with whatever resources that we have within us that will help us get to where we want to be, which is in a state of peace and acceptance from what has just happened. So I've had a friendship that ended quite abruptly. There weren't any harsh conversations or confrontations. I sent a few messages. I tried to get them to connect to me because I didn't want this friendship to end. And I just wasn't really met with anything but silence. And it's taken months to kind of move through that and get over that. And as I'm talking about it, it kind of feels like I'm talking about a breakup, and it is a breakup. So when this happens to you, whether or not you've had that conversation, really honour how you feel, because it's not nice. You know, often friends come before lovers, partners, husbands, and so forth. You know, friends are really important. But you've also got to understand that sometimes friends don't want to have those difficult conversations. Maybe they're not ready to. Maybe they don't even understand why they feel the way that they feel. Maybe it's not even about you. Maybe it's bigger than you. And you just have to resign to the fact that they might come back to you. when it feels right for them and when they've processed whatever is going on for them, and that's okay. That isn't a ghoster to me. That is someone who is in pain and who needs that time and space for themselves. You can make it known that you're there for them, but that's all you can do, and don't push, because it's just irritating and it's annoying for the other person. I've been on both sides of that. I'll give you an example. So let's say you've just announced that you're expecting a baby and your friend suddenly kind of just goes a bit quiet, there's radio silence. You might not know that they've been struggling with fertility issues for years. You might not know that they'd just miscarried a month before. So like I said, sometimes it can just be bigger than you. So while it's really important to make a friend know that you're invested in this friendship, equally it's also important to give them space. I think in your gut you will know intuitively whether this person needs space or not, because hopefully you're that good a friend, or your friendship is that close where some things just are unspoken and felt instead. So let's get back to just friendships that are on the cusp of dying away. You've given that friend space to breathe, you've tried to connect with them, you're just being hit by a wall of silence. How do you navigate around this? Accept that the value you place on this friendship may not be reciprocated anymore, and that's okay. Things change, people change. Know that there could be a bigger issue at play that doesn't necessarily involve you or isn't a personal attack on you, and perhaps more information is needed. Appreciate that this person may be going through something that they may not feel ready to talk about with you. So don't push, query or challenge, at least not straight away. Put some respectful breathing space in between, for you and for them. This might help diffuse any anger you may feel. Have an open, honest and compassionate conversation around this. Not haphazardly. Pick a time, pick a mutual place and speak about your feelings. Accept that you might not receive the clarity that you were after, and the friendship may just dissolve around you anyway. Like I said, I really struggled with this last point, and I think what helped me eventually move through it is to just accept how I was feeling and go through the motions, because really that's all you can do. I also found some sort of semblance of comfort by talking it out with people really close to me, like my husband. That really helped. But there'll come a point where you just don't really want to talk about it anymore, and you just kind of need to go in and accept the situation for what it is. Because remember, you know, we can control how we want our hair and how we want our makeup and how we want certain things to go, but we can't control everything. So why bother trying, right? Ultimately, when you've spoken it out, written it out, cried about it, acceptance can pave the path to a greater sense of healing, more healing than you might think. My final thoughts. First of all, know that being gaslighted or ghosted is just not acceptable by anyone in any form. So if that's happening to you, seek support either professionally, therapeutically, and by those and from those around you. Understand that there may be a bigger picture at play. You might have announced something like a pregnancy, and your friend may really be struggling with that. I've been on both sides of this. When I was struggling to have a baby, pregnancy announcements would make me bitter as hell. Honestly, like, I felt they all came at once, and each pregnancy announcement was like a punch in the gut. It was physically and emotionally painful, and I just didn't want to be around that person. I needed space to heal and breathe and just feel sorry for myself and cry about it, and understand and know that your friend will be elated for you, but they'll also feel sad for themselves. your good news may trigger something really deep-seated and painful for them. So really hold on to that. And you know, if a friend has suddenly done a disappearing act on you, if a friend suddenly feels a bit distant, try and retrace your steps back to when things were okay. So what happened just before? And if you realise that you'd made a big announcement, you'd been going through a real life change, appreciate that that might have triggered something for them, and be there, hold a compassionate space. And finally, friendships can be difficult. Friendship groups can feel pressurising and overwhelming. I've not really spoken about my friendships as a mother per se in this video, because I think it's just such a big topic. But what I will say is, when you're a mum, your priorities do change. The time that you have for everything shrinks, because ultimately your priority is your family, it's your child, it's rearing your child and bringing them up in a safe and loving environment. That takes time, that takes commitment, and you're balancing everything out with your career and so many other aspects to your life. But friends are important, and it's a steep learning curve, and I've really found that myself, because it takes patience, it takes work, it's an art to be able to balance everything flawlessly. And I'm still very much on that learning curve, and yes, I've lost friends along the way and it's been painful. But you know what? I've connected with some beautiful people along the way too, and that has been so nourishing and fulfilling for me. And you know, at times when I think about the other friends that have just been and gone, I'll appreciate the friendships for what they were and what I learned. But I'm also going to look forward to these new friendships and what they can provide. And it may be something completely different, but you know what? There's nothing wrong with that, is there? So bring it on. Here's to some new, beautiful friendships, and some fruitful and valuable and valued old ones.